I've always wondered if there was a precise moment when a person decides they're unworthy of love. If I had to pinpoint it, I'd say it was the night I turned 16, sitting at the chipped oak dining table while my parents told me, in the most casual way imaginable, that I'd never amount to anything. I was a scrawny kid with a mop of dark hair I refused to cut, thinking it made me look artistic. Back then, I still believed in that word, artistic. My father, Greg Carter, called it pretending, and my mother, Denise, said I was just looking for attention. I can still picture the kitchen under that yellowed ceiling light, the cheap linoleum floor, the smell of overcooked chicken, my father's voice, flat and certain, as he sliced into his dinner and into my dreams at the same time. You think you're special, Ethan, but you're not. You're going to be a nobody. Sooner you accept that, the better. Years later, that sentence still echoed in the back of my skull like a bad song you can't turn off. But when I moved to Chicago and started building my freelance design business, I didn't have time to look back. Every hour was survival. Every client was a chance to prove them wrong. And every small success was something I kept to myself, like a secret I was afraid they'd ruin if they ever found out. It had been 7 years since I'd heard their voices in person. 7 years since I'd stood in that claustrophobic kitchen. 7 years since I'd let them define who I was. That was why, when my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, an ordinary gray Tuesday in March, and I saw Mom blinking on the screen, my chest tightened like someone had reached in and squeezed my lungs. For a full 30 seconds, I just stared at the name. My thumb hovered over the green button. My stomach turned. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Hello. There was a beat of silence, and then her voice, brittle and almost shy. Ethan, it's your mother. I swallowed hard.
Yeah.
I know. How are you? She asked, as if we were two old acquaintances who'd fallen out of touch over something trivial. I'm fine. Working. A long pause followed, heavy with unsaid things. My gaze drifted over my apartment. The high ceilings I'd always dreamed of, the bright corner where I set up my studio, the framed design awards lined up neatly along the bookshelf. Proof that I'd built something. But in that moment, none of it seemed real. I felt 16 again, and the walls felt too close. She cleared her throat. Your father and I were talking about you. My jaw clenched. Were you? Yes, she said, the word too smooth practiced. We were wondering how you're doing. If you're successful. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. I'm surviving, Mom. Like always. Ethan, she began, her tone shifting. Almost hopeful. Would you ever think about coming home for a visit? I closed my eyes. The question wrapped around me like a snake. There was no warmth in it, no genuine curiosity. Just something that felt rehearsed. I don't think so. She hesitated. I see. Another silence. I almost hung up. But something made me stay, some morbid curiosity to know why she'd really called. Then she said the thing that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. Your father and we've been meaning to talk to you. About something important. Important, I repeated slowly.
Yes.
But maybe now's not the time. I pictured them in that same outdated kitchen, the same table, the same judgmental stares. I imagined my father listening on speaker, arms folded across his chest. I tried to convince myself that this was normal, that maybe they'd finally decided to apologize. But I knew better. All right, I said carefully. You can call me later. I ended the call before she could reply. For a long moment, I just sat there, phone still in my hand. The afternoon light angled through the window, throwing golden lines across the floor. Everything was exactly the same, and yet it wasn't. Because she'd never called before. Not in 7 years. That evening, I poured myself a glass of bourbon, my one indulgence, and sat on the sofa, replaying the conversation in my head. I tried to remember the last time she'd sounded so tentative. The last time I'd heard her voice without the edge of disappointment. I couldn't. And that bothered me more than I cared to admit. Around midnight, when I was sure I wouldn't sleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up an old folder I hadn't looked at in years. Photos from before I left. There we were, lined up in front of the house. My father, tall and broad-shouldered, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. My mother, her smile as tight as the bun in her hair, and me, clutching a sketch pad against my chest like it was armor. I studied my own face, the forced smile, the uncertainty in my eyes. I'd forgotten how small I looked. I clicked through picture after picture, feeling something I couldn't name. Sadness? Nostalgia? Rage? Probably all three. At the bottom of the folder was a file I'd saved the week I left, a scanned copy of a letter my father had left on my desk. I opened it, though I'd memorized every word. Ethan, I hope you find whatever you think you're chasing. Just know that real life doesn't care about your dreams. You'll come home when you fail. I closed the laptop. For a moment, I just stared into the darkness of my living room. And in that darkness, something shifted. Because for the first time, I didn't feel the old sting. I didn't feel like that 16-year-old boy. I felt like a man who had proven them wrong. And yet, a question tugged at me, persistent as a splinter. Why now? The next morning, my phone buzzed again. Another call. Dad. This time, I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the screen until it went dark. My heart thudded against my ribs. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. I stared at it for a long while, my thumb hovering. Part of me didn't want to hear his voice, but I tapped play. Ethan. His tone was clipped, but there was something in it I'd never heard before. We need to talk. Soon. I swallowed hard. They needed something. I could feel it. And whatever it wasn't going to be simple. I set the phone down and took a slow breath, forcing myself to remember that I wasn't that boy anymore. But in the silence, the old doubts crept in anyway, whispering that maybe I'd never really left that kitchen. I tried to go back to my routine. Wake up, brew some black coffee, sit at my desk and try to write. But my hands hovered above the keyboard as my thoughts replayed my father's voice from the night before, tight with tension, but wrapped in a false lightness. So, you've done well for yourself, huh? That shouldn't have struck me as strange. But it did. It was the way he said it, like he was testing the words before swallowing something bitter. He had never acknowledged my work before, not when I landed my first freelance contract, not when my book hit the Amazon charts, not even when I moved into my own apartment in Manhattan. In their eyes, I was still the kid who wasted time drawing comics and reading novels instead of studying accounting. And now, all of a sudden, he cared? I shook my head. You're overthinking. You want there to be something suspicious because it validates your pain. Let it go. I forced myself to dive into editing a chapter, but I couldn't focus. Every notification on my phone felt like a distant drumbeat, warning of something unseen approaching. That afternoon, I got a message from my mother. Just a single line. Hope you're eating well. We should catch up sometime soon. She hadn't messaged me in nearly 9 months. My heart gave a confused thump. I typed, sure. Everything okay? No reply. The next day, while grabbing lunch with Theo, my best friend since college, I finally spilled some of it. They're acting weird, I told him, swirling my straw through the melting ice in my soda. Like suddenly warm. Curious. Tentative. Theo raised an eyebrow. Isn't that good? Yeah, but it's not them, I said. They're not the type to check in. Not unless something's wrong. You think they need something? He asked. I paused. That was the first time I'd let the thought fully form. Maybe, I said quietly. Theo leaned forward. Do you care if they do? I didn't know how to answer that. A part of me still wanted them to acknowledge how wrong they were. Another part, a deeper, smaller part, wanted to believe they were simply trying to reconnect. But that hope faded the next morning when I noticed a strange email from an old mutual contact, my parents' former financial advisor, Mr. Hawkins. I hadn't spoken to the man since I was 19. Yet there it was, sitting in my inbox like an accidental ghost. Subject: your parents. Hi, Alex. Apologies for the unsolicited message. I recently came across some information that may be of interest to you regarding your parents' financial situation. If you have time, I'd appreciate a quick call. I stared at the screen. My pulse quickened. My parents never mentioned anything about money. In fact, they always made it seem like they were thriving, boasting about new cars, renovations, and my dad's connections. Why was their advisor emailing me? I called Hawkins. He answered on the second ring. Alex. I wasn't sure if this was still your number. It is, I said. What's going on? There was a pause. Then, a careful breath. Your parents haven't told you? I braced myself. Told me what? They're in trouble, he said. Financially. Deep trouble. The kind that isn't solved with a loan. I've tried to reach them for months. They're dodging everyone. I gripped the edge of my desk. Why are you telling me? Because I think you have a right to know. And because your name came up. I frowned. What do you mean? I probably shouldn't be saying this, he said slowly, but from what I understand, they're considering options. And you seem to be one of them. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Just be cautious, he said finally. They may come to you as if they're seeking forgiveness or connection, but it may be about more than that. I didn't sleep much that night. My brain replayed old wounds like a slideshow, my mother mocking my silly dreams, my father telling relatives I was just freelancing in a tone that sounded like disappointment. I remembered Christmases where they forgot I was vegetarian, birthdays where they gifted me generic ties I never wore, and college nights when I had to sell my old laptop just to afford groceries because they didn't believe in handouts. Now, apparently, they believed in them. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the counter in the dark, chewing on the silence. The refrigerator hummed softly. Outside, the streetlight flickered like an omen. And still, I hesitated to believe the worst. Maybe they're trying to change. Maybe this is just life bringing us full circle. Maybe forgiveness is the final stage of growth. But that fragile hope collapsed the next morning. My doorbell rang at 10:17 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the camera. My father, in a suit that looked a little too big. His expression somewhere between stern and hollow. My stomach dropped. I opened the door. Alex, he said with a practiced smile. It's been a while. Yeah, I replied, stepping aside. He walked in like a stranger, glancing around at my place, the exposed brick, the bookcases, the minimalist art, like he didn't expect any of it. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he still saw me as a broke dreamer. Nice place, he said finally. I folded my arms. What's this about? He sat down without asking, rested his elbows on his knees, exhaled. Look, he said. I won't waste your time. Things have changed. Your mother and we've hit some rough patches. I said nothing. He looked up. I'm not going to pretend we were perfect parents. But you turned out all right, didn't you? There it was. That strange mixture of deflection and pride. I kept my face neutral. What do you want? He leaned back, eyes darting around the room again. Just a conversation. Maybe some help. I narrowed my eyes. Help. He nodded. Short term. Alone. A chance to breathe. I laughed. Not a joyful one. A cold, shocked laugh. After all these years, now you come to me? He didn't answer. The silence was sharper than any insult he'd ever thrown at me. I wanted to scream, to list every way they'd made me feel worthless, to shout that my success wasn't an accident. It was in spite of them. But instead, I just stared at him. Really looked at him. He looked older, smaller, lost. And that scared me more than his presence. Because if they were desperate enough to come here, unannounced, what else were they hiding? He left 30 minutes later, no answers given, no promises made. But as he stood at the doorway, he turned to me and said, You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. We're still your parents. Then he was gone. I stood there long after he left. The door ajar, the air cold. They were still my parents. But now I was no longer their helpless child. And for the first time in my life, they needed me. I should have known something was coming. The calls had grown more frequent, the tone more delicate, and the pauses between words were heavier than usual, as if they were rehearsing each line before they dared say it. But even then, I wasn't prepared for what I was about to uncover. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in my loft apartment in downtown Chicago, a space I had earned through sleepless nights, rejected pitches, and late-night breakdowns. Sunlight pooled through the industrial windows, bouncing off the glass and steel interior, a far cry from the small, musty house I grew up in. I had just ended another call with my father. It was brief, strained, filled with empty niceties. He had asked about my work again, but not in the mocking tone I remembered, more like he needed to know. I tried to dismiss it again, but something told me this time I needed to stop pretending it didn't bother me. I opened my laptop, navigated to an old shared family email account I hadn't accessed in years, the one my parents used to communicate when they wanted to include me in family updates I never asked for. I scrolled through dozens of unread newsletters and photos of cousins I barely remembered. But one message stood out. It was sent to a bank. I recognized the name immediately. My childhood home's mortgage lender. I clicked it open. What I saw froze my hands midair. It was an automated notice. Final foreclosure warning. Immediate action required to avoid asset seizure. Dated just 3 weeks ago. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. My parents were about to lose their house, and they hadn't said a word. I leaned forward again, hands trembling, searching through more emails. Credit card overdue notices. Late utility bills. Final notices from creditors. There were more than 20. How had they hidden this for so long? My head spun with the weight of it. The people who once told me I'd never make it, who scoffed when I said I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur, who told me I was wasting my time on pipe dreams, were drowning in debt. And they had come to me not to apologize, but to bait me. They hadn't even had the decency to be honest. I closed the laptop slowly, resting my fingertips on the cool metal. My stomach knotted. The questions came in rapid fire. How long had they been watching me? Was every phone call over the past year just a way to keep tabs on my success? Had they ever really believed in me? Or was I just a safety net now? I stood up and walked to the window, watching the cars crawl through the streets below. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head, thick with disdain. You're chasing fairy tales, boy. Come back when you're done playing genius. And I had come back, but not in the way they imagined. I reached for my phone. I had to know more. My younger cousin, Ellie, still lived near my hometown and was often in touch with my family. We hadn't spoken in a while, but she'd always liked me, thought I was the cool cousin who escaped the family's emotional quicksand. I called her. She picked up immediately. Wow. Hey, she chirped. Long time. What's up? I didn't waste time. Ellie, do you know what's going on with my parents? Silence. A beat passed before she spoke again, her voice lower. So, you know. Know what? I pressed. She sighed. They're in trouble. Big time. I wasn't supposed to say anything, but yeah. Your dad's business failed last year. Quietly. They maxed out every card. Took out a second mortgage. I think they even borrowed money from Aunt Lisa. But now, it's all crashing. The words hit like bricks. I wasn't angry yet, just stunned. Why didn't they say anything? They were ashamed, Ellie said softly. Your mom told me last Thanksgiving that it wasn't your concern, that you wouldn't care anyway. But I think they just couldn't face you. I swallowed hard. Couldn't face me, or couldn't admit they were wrong? Ellie didn't answer that. We hung up soon after, and I sat in silence for a long while, the weight of reality pressing into my chest. The very people who made me feel like a failure were now, silently, strategically, depending on the success they had mocked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories crashed over me like waves. My father tearing up my college application essay and tossing it in the trash. My mother shaking her head during my graduation, telling a family friend that I should have become a nurse like a real man. The cold shoulders when I said I was starting my own tech consultancy. The time they laughed when I moved to Chicago with just $500 to my name. I thought I had buried those wounds, that I had healed. But now, they were bleeding again. The next day, I drove 6 hours across the state line, back to the ghost town of my childhood. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to see them raw, unprepared. When I pulled into the driveway, I was stunned by how different the house looked. The yard was overgrown. The paint on the siding had begun to peel. One of the windows was boarded up with cardboard and duct tape. I hadn't been here in years, but it felt like it had aged a lifetime. I walked to the door and knocked. My mother opened it. For a moment, she looked confused, then stunned, then something I couldn't quite place. Relief, maybe. Or fear. "Eli," she said, breath catching in her throat. "You're here." "I saw the emails," I said. No smile. No hug. No reunion. Her face drained of color. She stepped back, letting me in. The inside was no better. The house reeked of neglect. Faded curtains, empty picture frames, silence thicker than dust. My father was in the living room, sitting on the recliner like a statue. When he saw me, he didn't get up. "Eli," he said. Just that. My name. No warmth. "I know everything," I said flatly. No one responded. I walked in, slowly, surveying the ruins of my past and the pride that had once filled this space. I had imagined this moment so many times, me returning in triumph, proving them wrong. But now that it was real, it felt empty. Hollow. "You didn't want to tell me?" I asked. My mother clasped her hands nervously. "We didn't want to burden you," I scoffed. "No, you didn't want to admit you were wrong about me." She looked down. "You told me I'd fail," I continued. "You said I'd come crawling back. But here I am, and it's you who are crawling." My father stood up, slowly, his face unreadable. "We did what we thought was right," he said. "You were chasing something stupid. You had no backup. No plan." "I was the plan," I snapped. "I believed in myself when you didn't. I built everything from the ground up, with no help from you." "We made mistakes," my mother whispered. "Mistakes?" I echoed. "You tried to destroy my confidence." "That's not a mistake. That's abuse." The room pulsed with silence. My father sat back down, defeated. "We need help," he finally said. "You're the only one left who can." There it was. The confession. The plea. Not an apology, just a request. The same people who had mocked my dreams now stood at the altar of my success, begging for grace. And yet, all I felt was sorrow. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just sorrow. Sorrow for the boy who had to fight for his own worth. Sorrow for the parents who let pride ruin love. Sorrow for a family too broken to say what needed to be said. As I stood there, in the ruins of my childhood, one thought echoed louder than anything. They hadn't just underestimated me. They never really knew me at all. I told myself I'd be composed. I'd stand in front of them without letting my voice crack or my hands tremble. But as I parked outside their crumbling house, I felt every memory pressing against my chest, every dismissal, every laugh, every time they said I'd never make it. My heart thundered, so hard it hurt. I walked up the chipped steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if they'd been waiting just behind it. My father looked older, more fragile than I remembered. My mother's face was pale, the lines around her mouth deep from worry or regret. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence was thick enough to suffocate me. "Come in," my mother finally murmured, stepping aside. The living room was eerily unchanged, same floral couch, same sagging curtains, but the air felt different, like everything here is hollow. I stayed standing. I needed to keep some distance, some semblance of control. "You said you wanted to talk," I began, my voice too steady to feel real. "Here I am." My father swallowed, glancing at my mother. She kept her gaze on the carpet. The tension vibrated between them, a silent accusation neither dared to speak aloud. We've fallen on hard times," my father said, his voice hoarse. "The business failed. We're months behind on the mortgage. If we don't pay, the bank will take everything." "And," I said flatly. My mother looked up. We didn't know who else to turn to. I almost laughed, but it came out as a strangled sound. "You didn't know who else to turn to? After everything? After all those years telling me I was worthless?" My father's jaw tightened. "That was never." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my composure fracturing. You said it 100 times. That I was a failure. That I was chasing pipe dreams. That I'd never be more than a disappointment. My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. We were hard on you because we were scared. Scared you'd waste your life. No, I corrected, my voice rising. You were hard on me because you couldn't stand that I wanted something different. That I didn't want your approval. That I was willing to risk everything to prove you wrong. The room fell silent again. I could feel the electricity of it in my bones. My father shifted in his chair, his mouth working soundlessly as if the right words had abandoned him. I'm not here to gloat, I said finally, though part of me wished I was. I'm here because you asked me to come. So say what you came to say. My mother reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out with a trembling hand. I didn't take it. It's the amount we need, she whispered. We don't expect you to. You expect me to bail you out. I cut in, the bitterness scorching my throat. After everything, you expect me to save you. My father's face darkened. You're our child. Family helps each other. I felt something in me splinter. Family? You called me a disgrace. You told everyone I was a failure. You cut me out of your lives. And now that you're desperate, you remember I exist. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive. My mother wiped her eyes. We were wrong. About you, about everything. But please, you have the means to help. We're not asking for forgiveness. We're asking for mercy. It was almost worse, hearing her sound so small. I'd spent my whole life trying to escape their disdain, only to find them here, diminished, pleading. I drew in a shaky breath. Why didn't you ever believe in me? My father looked away, his shoulders hunched. My mother's lip trembled. Because we were jealous, she whispered. Because you had the courage to be what we never could. Her confession cracked something open in me, a fissure of understanding that hurt more than the resentment ever did. For one heartbeat, I saw them not as tyrants, but as frightened, broken people. But that didn't erase the years they made me feel like I was nothing. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady the chaos inside me. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice raw. I don't even know if I want to. My father finally met my gaze. Then don't forgive us, he said, his voice rough with something like shame. Just help us. If not for us, then for yourself. To prove we were wrong. The words were meant to manipulate me. I could feel it, but part of me wanted to accept them anyway. To prove I'd transcended the pettiness, the wounds. To show that I was bigger than their contempt. I looked down at the paper still trembling in my mother's hand. I thought of the nights I'd cried alone in my tiny apartment, the mornings I'd force myself out of bed just to keep going. I thought of every time I'd promised myself that someday I'd make them regret everything they'd ever said. And now that day was here. I stepped forward and took the paper, not because I decided to help, but because I needed time to decide. Their eyes followed me as I folded it carefully and slid it into my pocket. Don't mistake this for forgiveness, I said quietly. Don't ever think this makes us even. I turned toward the door. My mother's voice broke behind me. Please, just tell us you'll consider it. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. The house was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat, heavy and relentless. I'll think about it, I said without looking back. But I'm not making any promises. And before they could reply, I stepped outside, letting the door close with a final, hollow thud. I stood in the silence of my apartment, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the rasp of my own breathing. It felt impossible to reconcile the past with the present, how all those years of ridicule and dismissal had led to this moment, where the power had shifted so completely that it felt surreal. They had once sat across from me at the kitchen table, telling me I'd amount to nothing. My father's voice had been cold and certain. You'll come crawling back when you fail. My mother hadn't even looked at me. She'd just picked at the tablecloth, as if she were embarrassed that I even existed. And yet here we were. The phone had rung again not an hour ago, my father's voice rasping with something that might have been shame or might have been the same pride that had always kept him from admitting weakness. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail, but I couldn't bring myself to delete the message. It was proof, a living artifact of everything I had become, everything they hadn't believed I could be. I walked to the window and looked down at the city, lights blinking like little confessions. My success hadn't come overnight. It had been 1,000 small humiliations. The nights I skipped dinner to pay for online courses, the weekends I spent alone while everyone else celebrated milestones I wasn't invited to. Every deal I closed, every client I signed, was another brick in the fortress I had built around my heart. But standing here, I felt the walls tremble. The fortress wasn't impenetrable. There was a part of me, a small, foolish part, that still wanted them to be proud. That wanted them to say they were sorry. That maybe even wanted to help them. I pressed play on the voicemail. My father's voice, ragged. We need to talk, please. Your mother isn't well, and I know you don't owe us anything. But we don't have anyone else. We thought, maybe you could call us back. His voice cracked on the last word. A tiny, pathetic sound. I felt my chest tighten. I remembered how, when I was 10, I had stayed home sick with the flu. I'd asked my father to sit with me while I tried to keep down water. He'd sighed, annoyed, and told me to toughen up, that no one was coming to save me. That had been a lesson of my childhood. Fend for yourself. No one was coming. I'd learned it too well. The part of me that wanted to forgive was at war with the part that wanted to watch them squirm. I imagined going back to that old house, standing in the doorway in the clothes I could finally afford, watching their faces as they realized I had everything they'd denied me. But then the other part of me, smaller, more fragile, whispered that maybe revenge wasn't enough. Maybe revenge didn't erase the past. I poured a glass of water, my hand trembling. My mother was sick. The woman who had never defended me, who had let my father's words stand as truth, was sick. Would she look at me now and see the child she'd ignored, or the adult she'd created through her indifference? I set the glass down and pressed my palms against the counter, remembering the last time I'd stood here late at night, replaying all the times they'd told me I'd never be good enough. My chest burned with the memory. But this was different. Now they needed me. I walked to the living room, pulled out the old photo album I'd kept buried in the closet. The photos felt like relics from someone else's life. My father's hand on my shoulder in one picture, his face tight and impatient. My mother holding my baby brother, her gaze drifting past me. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't even seen. And now? Now they saw me clearly because I was the only one left to save them. The thought was almost nauseating. I closed the album and sat back, staring at the ceiling. The question circled in my mind over and over. If I helped them, what would it mean? That they were forgiven? That I was weak? Or that I was finally free? I didn't know. I thought of the last words my father had said to me the day I left home. You'll regret this. One day you'll come back begging for help. How absurd that the opposite had come true. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. The phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I didn't check it. Instead, I went to my office, where the symbols of my success lined the shelves, framed contracts, a plaque commemorating my first million, an award for innovation in my field. Proof that I had made it, that I hadn't needed them. So why did I still feel like that same desperate kid? I pulled my chair out and sat down, running my hands over the desk. I knew that whatever choice I made, there would be no going back. If I ignored them, I'd be sealing the final wall between us. If I helped them, I'd be opening the door to all the pain they'd caused. I closed my eyes. Images flickered behind my eyelids. My father turning away when I cried, my mother flinching as if my emotions were too loud, too embarrassing. The empty chair at every recital, the silence after every report card, the casual cruelty that had shaped me. And beneath it all, something worse, the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, this was their way of apologizing. I swallowed hard. I couldn't let that hope decide for me. The phone buzzed a third time. I stared at it until the screen went dark. When I finally picked it up, my hand was steady. I didn't know yet what I would say, but I knew this. I had outgrown their scorn. I had survived every prediction of my failure. I had become something they never imagined. I pressed play on the last message. My mother's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. I know you probably hate us. I understand if you do, but pleased if you can call me back. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air like a thin, fragile thread. I closed my eyes and listened to them again.
Sorry.
I didn't know if it was enough. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to touch the rooftops. A pale wash of light softened the edges of the city, and for a moment, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I wasn't the same person they'd tried to break. I opened my eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. The world was moving on, indifferent to the history that held me in place. I picked up the phone, feeling something calm and dangerous settling inside me. Maybe I'd call them back. Maybe I'd help them. Maybe I wouldn't. But whatever I chose, it would be my choice, not theirs. I set the phone down and turned away from the window, a single thought crystallizing in the quiet. They would never again decide who I was. And as that thought took root, I felt a pair of eyes watching me, not from the shadows, but from the past itself. All those voices telling me I'd never make it. All those doubts, fading into nothing. I smiled, a small, cold smile, and whispered into the silence. Look at me now.